I've been doing traditional art for a while now, and I've been having a blasty blast. There's just something about traditional drawing, a mindset and feeling that helps to make me a better artist, or so I believe. Of course, I'm also trying to get back into digital work, but I'm hoping to develop a workflow that combines the two. And because of this, I have developed the need for better traditional supplies, primarily inking supplies. Up until now, I've been using whatever I could find or afford, and though the materials don't make the artist, the struggle of using the cheapest materials was annoying and honestly ruined my pencil drawings. I mean, that was also because I haven't inked traditionally in a while and had no idea what I was doing, but I also knew that the supplies I was using wouldn't give me the results I wanted, especially since I barely understood what results I was looking for. So I did some research, and I got a collection of recommended supplies so that I could experiment and see what works for me. A collection of pen nibs, nib holders, brushes, and a variety of inks. I also got my go-to sizes of Micron inking pens, which are not as fun to use anymore compared to the nibs and brushes, but I tried them all out anyway. First thing I had to do was test out the new materials, the nibs, the brushes, and the inks. Making random marks on a piece of paper, seeing the kind of strokes each of them would make, and seeing how each ink looked. I also tested to see what ink was waterproof. From my experience, they all reacted to the water in some way, but some inks were more resistant. As long as I don't drown the drawings in water, they should be fine. And I don't think I can use watercolor over any of the inks I have, but maybe I'll find out later. Ultimately, the two inks I ended up liking was a big $4 bottle of India ink I got from Hobby Lobby, and a smaller $15 bottle of acrylic ink I got on Amazon. But I'm sure you can guess which one I'm going to be using the most. At first, the India ink from Hobby Lobby didn't work. It was watery and didn't stick to my nibs at all. I figured it was probably only usable by brush. I mean, what did I expect from such a cheap bottle of ink? Clearly, its inferior pricing was a sign that this ink was incapable of producing quality work. How shameful must I have been to purchase such an ink? To think I'd spit in the face of every ink enthusiast by implying I could purchase good inks without sacrificing a meal or two. That I'd mock the gods, flaunting my cramped wallet as if my purchase would lead to. Then I realized I was supposed to shake the bottle before use. Which seems obvious, but I just forgot. I even remember shaking other inks, so I honestly don't know what came over me. It ended up being a really good ink that I plan to use a lot. It's affordable and I get a lot in one container. I'm honestly waiting for something bad to happen so I can justify why it's so cheap. The first thing I did was test out the nibs. I was actually really excited to do it too. That artist feeling when you get a new toy to play with. Now, it wasn't my first time using a nib. I remember trying a nib in high school and then giving up on it. At the time, I decided just to use the Microns. Things have changed since then. I've obtained a creative maturity that allows me to enjoy the process of using the nibs in a way I couldn't back then. Not saying that you're not mature if you don't use nibs, it's just that I was so quick to disregard it as a tool when I was younger, lacked the patience and understanding of its benefits. I tried a few of the nibs I had bought and settled on the two that I like to use after a couple of days of testing. I settled on the Nico Spoon nib and the Nico School nib. Together, they give me all the range and line variety I'm currently looking for in my art. And by narrowing the amount of nibs I use, I can simplify my process and learn faster. Next, I had to practice with the brushes. Didn't need to learn to use every one, just how to control the thinner brushes, see how they work and how I can use them, making small lines, long lines, curved lines, same as the nibs, only brushes can make circles. The brushes also come with a more aggressive form of line variety. Even the smaller brushes make bold lines, but it wasn't long before doing these lines got boring and repetitive. I needed to do an actual drawing, but the only drawing I had was a full illustration with Batman, one I was surprised I made. I didn't want to ruin it with lousy inks, so I decided to draw some quick heads so I could ink them instead. Now for some reason, I really didn't want to use the Micron pens. They just didn't seem as fun compared to the brushes and nibs. Plus I knew it would be more complicated if I wanted to get the same line variety. It felt really awkward going back to the Micron pens, and they just didn't do what I wanted them to do. And it was indeed boring. Goodbye, Woody. Now, of course there is nothing wrong with Micron pens. And it's not like I've transcended beyond their use. Many professionals still use Micron pens and similar products exclusively in their work, and they make drawings much better than I am capable of. But I've reached a point where I'm not going to base my process on what others are doing, but instead focus on what works for me. For me, Micron pens are very mechanical and stiff. They provide lines without very much variety unless you switch to a different pen or go back over your lines, which isn't a bad thing, but it looks stiff when I do it. Doesn't mean I'm going to stop using Microns, just means my priority will be on learning to use other tools. Next, it was time for the fun stuff, brushes. For these drawings I decided to try the acrylic ink, and it is honestly the darkest ink I've ever seen in my life. It's so black and matte, I wish I could use it all the time, but boy is it pricey. There wasn't a lot of rendering to do on these heads, but for what I was able to do, I found using the brushes to be fun. And the look it gives is less mechanical and more organic, partially because of the line variety, and partially because of my inability to do a clean line as often as I would like. I definitely want to do full drawings with just the brush from time to time, though most of the brushes I have won't really be used. I'd only need bigger brushes to fill in large areas of black, and medium brushes aren't necessary because anything they can do can simply be done with a large brush or a small brush. Like I said before, the line variety is a lot more aggressive. A small brush can go from a thin stroke to a thick stroke really fast. You can't be heavy-handed with a brush or you'll only get thick lines. You also want to be careful not to fray the tip of the brush by being too rough with it. And be sure not to over-dip the brush. If you soak it in ink, then it will drip and run all over your paper, making it hard to get clean lines. Lastly was the nibs, or should I say the nib and brush hybrid. The primary inking and lines are done with the nibs and dark spots are filled in with the brush. Not all drawings will need the brushes, but I have fallen into a habit of covering Batman in black. It's a cheat code to make him look more like Batman without any extra rendering. A cheat code I am hoping to stop using in the near future, or at least one I don't want to have to rely on. Now, the nibs make straight lines easier to draw, while the brushes do curved lines better, at least for now. With the nibs, I find it easier to get a more polished look off the bat, no pun intended. It's easier to control the line variety with the nib as well, and it's just as fun as the brush. It's definitely going to be my primary tool for inking until I find another tool that pushes me forward. Now there is a lot more dipping with the nibs, and a lot more risk. Unfortunately, the ink doesn't dry immediately after being placed on the page. It sort of sits on top of the page until it sinks in. This means that it can be smudged, if not careful, which I've done a lot of. Like the brushes, you can also over dip, causing a pool of ink to build up on the nib and fall to the tip, patiently waiting for its moment to spill out on your page. On top of that, the dip pins dig into the paper and can only be dragged in a few directions. You definitely have to pay more attention when using the dip pins, which isn't a bad thing. In fact, it's a good thing. Normally as a beginner, inking is seen as a tracing over pencils, darkening lines already put down. and so it's not often looked at as a separate art or a chance for improvement. With nibs, I am forced to put more thought into my lines and to slow down while inking. I'm still discovering my style, so I will be trying a lot of things in the years to come. I also have white ink, but I didn't feel ready to start experimenting with that and the black ink at the same time. I want to focus my learning on as few things as possible so that I don't become overwhelmed. But anyway, that's all for now. I hope this video was helpful to at least one of you out there. If not, let us know in the comments what could be done better. And if you know of other ways we can level up our art skills, let us know that as well. Also, while you're down there, I would love it if you would subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can see what I do next. But until we meet again, I would just like to say, welcome to Edenwick.